Morning. So as the attack upon free speech continues, I think this time it's gone a little bit too far. So despite Keir Starmer's assurances to the United States that we still have free speech in the United Kingdom, the latest guidance that I see online from Prevent, which is part of the government strategy to prevent radicalization and extreme terrorist ideologies, if you believe that Western culture is under threat from mass migration, you are at risk of being labelled a right-wing extreme terrorist. There's a little bit more to it than that, but on the face of it, that appears to me to be a curtailment of free speech, and quite probably it is unlawful. And please do remember to subscribe to this channel for my views on this. You may not get these sort of views anywhere else. I am not anything to do with the mainstream media. I am independent, and I will give you my independent views. So please do subscribe and listen very carefully. So I will explain why I think they can possibly just about get away with it, but I still don't think it's right. So it's this article here that has blown up all over X, and Lord Young of Free Speech Union has written to Yvette Cooper to say this needs to be rewritten urgently because people are at risk of essentially being referred to Prevent, which could have a black mark on your record permanently, even if they find that there's no need to actually do anything with you. This could have an effect upon the rest of your life. Now, I will say at the outset that I think that the likes of MI5, MI6 are far more rigorous, as is quoted in this article here from one of the previous advisors, whereby a former government advisor here says the definition here of cultural nationalism, which I'll come to in a minute, is pretty shoddy, and says agencies like counterterrorism police and MI5 are much more rigorous in their classifications. We're talking about here, he says, right-wing extremists who are often neo-Nazis, which obviously I don't think anyone's going to argue about here. But the concern here, as reported in this article, which I'll link below, is over this bit here. And also I've seen it referred to elsewhere. For example, someone quoted this from Cambridgeshire County Council in their safeguarding training, also referring to cultural nationalism. They say previously referred to as right-wing. But let's take a look at what it says here. I will read it with an open mind, and I will tell you why I think they can just about get away with what they've put here. But I think it is seriously at risk of misuse, and therefore could end up with the wrong people, as in innocent people, just expressing their views, being somewhat labelled as a right-wing extremist, which obviously might well come under terrorist ideology. Now, let's be absolutely clear. If someone is an extremist anything, extreme left, extreme right, extreme whatever, then that is obviously something we need to look at, because when somebody, let's just be absolutely clear about this, because I feel that this is necessary in my video to be absolutely clear with you what I think here. For somebody to be extreme, it will usually mean that they are going to go down a path, do things and say things, advocate things that we really should not accept as a society. For example, they will advocate hate, they will advocate violence, they will advocate other people to have extreme views and follow extreme ideologies. Those things, I think, stands to reason, are wrong, and we shouldn't accept that. We shouldn't allow people to go down that path to advocate hate and violence and discrimination and everything else. So that forms part of my explanation here. I think we're probably all in agreement that however strongly you feel about something and you express your views, you shouldn't really be advocating any kind of violence, any kind of discrimination, and any kind of encouragement for other people to take extreme views. That said, let's take a look at this, because it says here, extreme right-wing. We define extreme right-wing terrorism as the act or vocal support of ideologies, and here's the key point that allows them, in my view, to get away with it, that advocate discrimination or violence against minority groups. Now, obviously, those things are wrong, because discrimination is wrong. You can hold a view, you can say that you don't like a particular person. I don't feel this way about anybody. I like to like everybody, but if somebody says they don't like a certain person or group or whatever, that's down to them. But to advocate discrimination, i.e. they shouldn't get that because of that characteristic, then I think that's wrong. And I think we are all correct to say that that is wrong. and certainly violence. I think that goes without saying. Nobody should be advocating violence. So if the ideology here is advocating discrimination or advocating violence against a minority group, obviously that's wrong. But the problem there is the first of these three. I mean, the second of the three I'll come to, which I think are less arguable here, to put it mildly. But the first one, I think, needs rewriting, because I think this has a problem. It says that they put the three most common subcategories of extreme right-wing terrorist ideologies and their narratives as follows. And they say the first one is cultural nationalism. Now, if that were to say extreme nationalism or whatever, then that might be better worded. But it says here Western culture, and this is the belief that they say is a potential extreme right-wing terrorist ideology. They say where someone thinks that Western culture is under threat from mass migration and a lack of integration by certain ethnic and cultural groups. And it doesn't say any more. That's all it says. So, ergo, if someone were to hold a cultural nationalism view per their definition, it is somebody that sees that Western culture is under threat from mass migration and that a lack of integration by certain ethnic and cultural groups puts that under threat. So if someone were to hold the view that, let's say a small, relatively small town or city of some 30, 40,000 people received 20,000 migrants across the channel who, let's say that they don't, I mean, they might, but let's say they don't integrate. Let's say they are just going to live there and they refuse to integrate and there is a lack of integration. Let's just say for this example, let's say that is a fact, that 20,000 come upon this small town of 30 or 40,000. So then roughly half of that area is then significantly different by way of their cultural background and ethnicity and so on. And again, that's not a criticism. I'm just stating a fact for this example here. If someone were then to hold the view and try to express the view that they believe that their Western culture in that area is under threat from this mass migration, even if, let's say they might support them, they might still support these people, and they might support the fact that these people need help and need support, etc. That might still be true. But they still might hold the view and express the view that their Western culture as they see it in that area is under threat from mass migration, if there's a lack of integration, etc. Now, that, per that first highlighted bit here, is a serious problem, because then potentially they could be accused of holding terrorist ideological views. But the only reason that they get away with that, in my view here, and this is the safeguard that if anyone is questioned about this and they are visited by a prevent team, and bearing in mind, and now everyone makes mistakes, but bearing in mind that this is the prevent team that ironically failed to prevent the Southport attack from that horrific criminal, they might visit you. And what I would urge you to point to is the following. Per their definition here is where they say, we define extreme right-wing terrorism as the active or vocal support of ideologies, such as that one below, that advocate discrimination or violence against minority groups. So if you've not done those things, you're not advocating discrimination and you're not advocating violence against those minority groups, because let's face it, the vast majority of you are not going to do that. The vast majority of you, I would hope all of you, but I would certainly stake that the vast majority of you watching are not going to advocate discrimination and you are not going to advocate violence. Those that do advocate violence end up in prison, as we've seen with Lucy Connolly by way of example. I don't agree with the length of the sentence, but that's another story. I agree that she shouldn't have said that, and no one should say those sort of things that advocate violence, or even unwittingly. I still don't believe that she actually genuinely truly meant that she wanted for that to happen, but that's another story. But you must bear this in mind, because if you get a visit and someone wants to discuss with you whether or not you hold these views that they consider extreme right-wing views, because you are talking, let's say, about cultural nationalism, Western culture, and you may believe that it is under threat from mass migration. You may believe that lack of integration is a problem here, but then you must remember that they have to tie in this first bit here, which would be the active or vocal support. Active might be out somewhere holding a banner, might be going on a march, might be doing something else, but or vocal support could include electronic communications. If you're supporting the ideology that is advocating discrimination or violence, and even then, if we drill down slightly further, I have something of an issue with the discrimination bit, because that could be misinterpreted and the definition abused. Because if you were saying, for example, if you were saying they should not get, whatever, healthcare or the things that they do get, again, with my usual caveat, some people absolutely do need the support, and many of them are here, and we do have a moral duty to help and support. But let's say that you held the view that they should not have a specific type of support. That could be viewed as discrimination. It could be articulated as discrimination. And so if you were to say that they should be treated less fairly because of a certain characteristic, and you are showing vocal support for an ideology such as this first one highlighted, with reference to any form of discrimination, they might then label you as an extreme right-wing person with terrorist ideological views. And I think that is far too far, as is penned in this article here. Concern about mass migration is a terrorist ideology that requires intervention by the government's anti-radicalization prevent program, according to official documents. This online training course hosted on the government website lists this cultural nationalism as a belief that could lead to an individual being referred to a de-radicalization scheme. This encompasses a conviction that Western culture is under threat from mass migration and a lack of integration by certain ethnic and cultural groups. Staff taking the course are told. Quite rightly, this has now been criticised as an attack upon free speech. Free speech critics warned that this definition of cultural nationalism was too widely drawn. I would add my view to that. I agree. I think it's too widely drawn and it's open to misinterpretation or even abuse by the few, which in theory could mean that even Keir Starmer and Robert Jenrick, Shadow Justice Secretary, would fall foul for their past comments. Because if you express views like that, very often strong views like that, they could be caught up in this definition, wrongly in my view, because it would be wrong. Now, then others at risk of being labelled extremists could include Douglas Murray, best-selling author, written extensively on migration, etc., as well as Matthew Goodwin of GB News. But then a Home Office spokesperson then said, "Prevent is not about restricting debate or free speech, but about protecting those susceptible to radicalisation." Lord Young, however, General Secretary for Free Speech Union, has written to Yvette Cooper, as I mentioned, urging her to reconsider this classification urgently. He said that anyone referred to prevent could face serious, long-lasting consequences for their education, employment, public reputation, etc. And so I think this is a serious problem because, as this quite rightly points to here, in theory, comments made by many politicians might be at risk of this as well, falling foul of this definition as well. So I think this is a serious attack upon free speech. So I would urge you, this is not a sponsored video in any way, shape or form. I would urge you to join Free Speech Union and just be mindful of these things that are happening. Do subscribe to my channel here for my views on this. This is not legal advice and it's not a replacement for legal advice, but this is genuinely what I think. And I would hope that at the end of the day, the likes of counterterrorism and MI5 would be much more rigorous in their classification and what they actually see as radicalization and extremism. Otherwise, as the article points out, this is really undermining the seriousness of what counterterrorism is all about. So do bear that in mind, do subscribe to the channel, and as always, thank you for watching.